Year two, week three, no breaks. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to another DNS address. Week three apparently had no interest in subtleties. Georgia Southern walked in Louisville, knocked off the number 14 team in the country. Joe Jackson rushed for more yards than some teams produced in an entire month. Georgia Tech scored 48 behind ACC Offensive Player of the Week. Old Dominion dropped 70 in a user matchup. 70, not a typo, not a basketball score, 70. And Sacramento State may have struggled as a team, but Gabe Moore still produced a conference award-winning defensive performance. And week three had ranked wins, 1-point survivals, user game destruction, and absolutely no breaks. Let's get into it. Our headliner of the week is Georgia Southern takes down number 14. Georgia Southern entered Louisville 1 week removed from heartbreak. The Eagles pushed number 11 Kansas State to final minutes. Only watch a potential game-tying drive become a 92-yard pick six. That type of loss can linger. Georgia Southern didn't allow it to. The Eagles defeat number 14 Louisville 31-24. Bryan completed 16 of 18 passes for 157 and a touchdown, 16 completions, 2 incompletions, and most importantly, 0 catastrophic fourth quarter throws, returned at 92 yards. Growth. Todd rushed for 70 and a touchdown. Woodgett added another score. Bradshaw caught four passes and found the end zone. Alex Taylor led the receivers with 60 yards. The Georgia Southern defense forced 2 interceptions. Emmett Walker led the unit with 11 tackles and 2 for loss. Kam Mikell delivered one of the biggest plays of the week, a 99-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. Louisville just had enough time to celebrate scoring, and Kam completed the celebration and sent it back. Georgia Southern earned a ranked road win, and now they return home for an even larger challenge. Number 4 BYU comes to Statesboro next week. The Eagles must, and they have already proven that they can compete with ranked opponents. Now they have an opportunity to take down a top 5 team. Stonewall Bennett, the schedule's not getting easier, and neither are the Eagles. Joe Jackson refuses to let South Florida lose. Number 21 South Florida traveled to Mississippi State and escaped with a victory that probably removed several years from both coaches' lives. South Florida wins 38-37. MVB Jr. completed 14 of 25 for 166. He threw 3 picks, no passing touchdowns under normal circumstances. That is where the offense begins filling out the paperwork for a loss. Joe Jackson rejected that paperwork, though. 23 carries, 337 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, 337 yards, 5 scores, 1 running back. Joe Jackson did not just carry the offense. He placed the entire team on his back and began sprinting towards the state line. Every time Mississippi State looked to take control, Jackson broke another run. Every time the Bulls needed a point, Jackson found the end zone. South Florida's passing game struggled. Jackson simply decided passing was optional. That performance earned Joe Jackson the National Offensive Player of the Week, and honestly, the rest of the country never had a chance. Defensively, Zinger delivered 14 tackles, an interception, and a forced fumble. The Bulls needed every single one of those plays. Mississippi State didn't go out quietly, though. Coolidge threw for 257 and 3 touchdowns. PhD produced 195 and 2 scores. Johnson caught 3 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown. Taylor returned an interception, 16 yards for a touchdown. Mississippi State scored on offense. Mississippi State scored on defense. They produced explosive plays and still finished 1 point short. The Bulldogs now have played 3 consecutive games decided by 1 point. They lost by 1, they won by 1, they lost by 1. Mississippi State football is apparently no longer a sport. It's a weekly cardiac examination. South Florida does enter a bye week this week after surviving. Mississippi State travels to Kentucky next week. Old Dominion drops 70 on Central Michigan for a user versus user matchup. Central Michigan needed its first victory. Old Dominion had already scored 55 points in the season opener. The Monarchs apparently considered 55 insignificant. Old Dominion wins 70-29, 70 points, folks. Coach Crow didn't bring the defending Sun Belt champs to Mount Pleasant to play football. He brought them for a demolition project. Burns completed 15 of 26 passes for 349 and 6 touchdowns, 6 passing touchdowns. Hillhouse rushed for 144 and a score. Bruno added 83 and 3 touchdowns, and Sherman caught 5 passes for a 165 and 2 scores. Old Dominion's offense produced 10 total touchdowns, and somehow the defense may have been even more disrespectful. They had 9 sacks and 3 picks. Central Michigan's quarterback spent so much time under pressure that the pocket required a missing persons report. Snead still threw for 302 and 3 touchdowns, though. Bush recorded 100 receiving yards and a score. Barr had 81 yards and another touchdown, and Vaughn Blue rushed for 94 and a score. Central Michigan did produce 29 points and still lost by 41. That is a difficult statement to explain at a post-game press conference. Old Dominion, though, now hosts number 9 Kansas State. Central Michigan enters a bye week, which should provide enough time to locate whichever offensive lineman disappeared during those 9 sacks. Kuma and Georgia Tech keep rolling. Number 22 Georgia Tech welcomed in Pittsburgh, then quickly made Pittsburgh regret attending. Georgia Tech wins 48-10. Klutz completed 17 of 21 passes for 191 and 2 touchdowns, but the afternoon belonged to Usman Kumar. Kuman had 21 carries, 207 yards, 3 touchdowns, 207 rushing yards, 3 scores, and then was named the Offensive Player of the Week for the ACC. Pittsburgh knew the run was coming. Georgia Tech knew, Pittsburgh knew. But Kuma just kept running. At some point, defensive awareness stopped mattering when the running back just simply refused to be tackled. It happens. Addison did catch 5 passes for 65 yards, but the dominant story behind Kuman belonged to the defense. 7.5 sacks, 7.5. Pittsburgh's quarterback spent most of the afternoon being introduced to the turf. Georgia Tech has now scored 55 at Tennessee and 48 against Pitt. The Yellow Jackets are not slowing down. They're building in year 2. That kicked the door. They also kicked the door wide open and brought their own fireworks. We'd love to see it. Virginia Tech visits Atlanta next week. Should be a good game. Gabe Moore earns the MAC Defensive Honor. Sacramento State traveled to Hawaii, and once again, the football became community property. Hawaii wins 41-9. Sam Babcock threw for 221 and a touchdown. He threw 3 interceptions. McKinney attempted 4 passes and threw 3 interceptions. That interception percentage has best to be described as please stop throwing. Sacramento State quarterbacks combined for 6 interceptions in the game. Godley rushed for 90 yards. Zalski caught 5 passes for 51. While the offense struggled, defensive tackle Gabe Moore delivered one of the best individual defensive performances of the week. 5 tackles, 3 for loss, 3 sacks, and a safety. Moore's performance earned him MAC Defensive Player of the Week. The scoreboard may not have gone Sacramento State's way, but Gabe Moore absolutely handled his assignment. A defensive tackle recorded 3 sacks and put points on the board. Unfortunately, the offense continued handing at Hawaii extra possessions. Memphis visits Sacramento State next week. The first offensive goal is going to not be complicated. Make sure Memphis earns the football. The turnover donation program continued, though, in Texas State. Texas State traveled to Minnesota and fell 42-13. Risling threw 214 yards and a touchdown, and he also threw 4 interceptions. Hurt completed 1 pass for -1 yard, which means his completion technically moved the offense back. Pryor rushed for 60. Browning scored on the ground. Steamy caught 9 for 104. There were productive moments, but 4 more interceptions made sustained offense impossible. Texas State enters the bye week. This gives the Bobcats extra time to work on several important concepts: ball security, decision making, and the radical new idea of throwing the ball to Texas State players. Northern Illinois, though, is still searching. Northern Illinois traveled to Missouri State, looked for its first victory. Missouri State wins 30-13. Brown did throw for 180 and a touchdown. He added 59 rushing yards, but he also threw 2 more interceptions. Coolidge produced 131 total yards and a rushing touchdown. Elijah Porter added a receiving touchdown. And the offense continued to move the football in stretches. But Northern Illinois couldn't finish enough drives. The Huskies return home next week to face FCS West. There's no guarantees in football, but Northern Illinois desperately needs this one to feel something close to a reset. Our stock-ups of this week, Georgia Southern, 1 week after a brutal ending. The Eagles walked into Louisville and defeated the number 14 team in the country. That is a response. Joe Jackson with 337 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, National Offensive Player of the Week. South Florida probably should rename the offensive playbook after him. Usman Kuma had 207 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. ACC Offensive Player of the Week. Georgia Tech's rushing attack is becoming a serious national problem. Old Dominion with 125 points across the last 2 games. The Monarchs are not defending their championship quietly. Gabe Moore had 3 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, a safety, and was named MAC Defensive Player of the Week despite Sacramento State's loss. And then our need more film of the week. We got 3 of them. Sacramento State's quarterback, 6 interceptions this week, 13 over the past 2 games. At some point, the opposing defense must begin paying our participation fee. Texas State's passing game, 4 more interceptions. The buys arrived exactly at the right time. And Central Michigan's pass protect, 9 sacks allowed in 1 game. Quentin Sneed may need his offensive line to introduce themselves before the next kickoff. Our Week 3 honors National Offensive Player of the Week is Joe Jackson from South Florida. 23 carries, 337 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a 1-point victory. This is simply the best offensive performance of the week. It's something much, much greater. Our Defensive Player of the Week is Gabe Moore from Sacramento State with 5 tackles, 3 for loss, 3 sacks, a safety. The Hornets struggled as a team, but Moore dominated individually. Our Built Not Given award of this week belongs to Georgia Southern. 1 week earlier, Georgia Southern had an opportunity to tie number 11, Kansas State. 1 bad decision turned into a 92-yard pick six and a heartbreaking loss. The Eagles could have carried that into Louisville. They didn't. They protected the football. They played physical defense. They created turnovers. They returned a kickoff 99 yards. And they were able to defeat the number 14 team in the country on the road. That response was built. It was not given. Our Week 4 spotlights, number 4 BYU at Georgia Southern. Again, this is the biggest opportunity for Stonewall Bennett in his tenure. Georgia Southern already defeated number 14 Louisville. But now number 4 BYU comes to Statesboro. Georgia Southern must protect the football, control the tempo, and make the home environment matter. Win this game, and the Eagles enter the national conversation in a completely different way. Number 9, Kansas State at Old Dominion. Kansas State's already survived 1 DNS opponent. Now the Wildcats face a program that scored 55 and 70 in the first 2 games. Old Dominion's offense is rolling. The defense just recorded 9 sacks and 3 picks. Kansas State brings the rank. Old Dominion brings an offense currently operating without a speed limit. Something has to give. Virginia Tech at number 22. Number 17, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has scored 103 in the last 2 games. The Yellow Jackets now face the Hokies with an opportunity to continue building nationally. Can the offense remain explosive? Can the pass rush continue creating chaos? Virginia Tech will produce a stronger test, but Georgia Tech looks ready. Around the Dynasty, we have Mississippi State traveling to Kentucky after a 1-point finish. Sacramento State hosts Memphis. Northern Illinois hosts FCS West. Missouri State travels to Arkansas State. Buffalo visits Troy. South Florida, Central Michigan, and Texas State enter their bye weeks. And for those 3 programs, rest, recruit, review the film, and in Texas State's case, probably remove the interception button from the controller. Commissioner's picks of this week. Georgia Southern's going to shock number 4 BYU in Statesboro. Old Dominion's going to continue its offensive performance and defeat number 9 Kansas State. Georgia Tech handles Virginia Tech and remains unbeaten. Mississippi State plays another close one in Kentucky, and apparently Bulldog football is contractually obligated to finish within 1 point. We'll see. Troy defeats Buffalo. Arkansas State defeats Missouri State. Sacramento State limits the turnovers and competes with Memphis. Northern Illinois will finally break through against FCS West. Please for everybody involved, break through. Overall, ladies and gentlemen, week 3 had no breaks. Georgia Southern took number 14, Louisville, down. Joe Jackson rushed for 337, scored 5 touchdowns, and earned National Player of the Week, National Offensive Player of the Week. Gabe Moore recorded 3 sacks, a safety, and earned MAC Defensive Player of the Week. Old Dominion scored 70 in a user matchup. Georgia Tech continued steamrolling opponents. South Florida survived by 1. Mississippi State lost by 1. And Sacramento State and Texas State continued making opposing defensive backs look like All-Americans. Next week brings 2 massive ranked opportunities. Number 4 BYU at Georgia Southern and number 9 Kansas State at Old Dominion. The spotlight gets brighter. The opponents get stronger. The margin of error gets smaller. Build on the win, respond to the loss, protect the football. And remember, an incompletion is still better than throwing 3 interceptions on 4 attempts. In the Department of Natural Selection, you select, we collect, built, not given.